Hello, welcome to Clarity Design. We are in May 2013 and today I'm looking at lighting, so what kind of lights we can generate and what their properties are. So first of all, to create a light you go to the create menu, you go down to lights, and then you've got 6 different lights down here. We're going to run through them quite quickly. First of all on the list is the ambient light. So the ambient light, the intensity you can see is here is 1. Increasing the intensity increases the amount of light in the scene, so that you can see without having to click on the render button what those lights are doing. You can press 7 on the keyboard and that will give you a lit view, or a kind of an average view of how that light is behaving and what's happening in that. So you can see increase the intensity there. I can also change the colour just by clicking on the colour tab and changing the colour here. Often a very soft yellow light is used to warm up skin tones, so that's worth bearing in mind. For this tutorial I'll just stick that back to 1. Apart from that, the ambient light is fairly basic. You can switch on shadows using ray trace. If you want to do that, you just click down here, scroll down until you find the tick button, tick that on, and then in your options, in the render options, which is just up here at the top bar, you can go to Maya Software tab and down to Ray Trace options or Ray Trace quality, and you need to switch it on there, and that way you'll get your shadows. I'm not going to do that in this tutorial. I'm not interested in playing around with that with you at the moment. So that's the ambient light. So moving straight on, you'll notice that I can change the type of light here. I don't have to make new lights. I can change them over down here. So I can switch it to an area light. Now oh sorry, that's directional. An area light. There we go. So the area light is very similar to the ambient light, apart from the fact that it's emitting from an overall space or area. So it's kind of got this whole space that it's moving, so it's a little bit more directional, but it's still emitting from this sort of space and moving over there. You can see that as I move it from side to side, it does affect how the light is changing in the scene. Now, if you'll notice that as I move this light away, the intensity of the light on the surface stays the same, so it doesn't get brighter or darker, and that's not very realistic. In real life, if you move a light further away, then the amount of light hitting the surface directly decreases. Okay, and that's called decay. And what they have got in the ambient light, in the area light, that they haven't got in the ambient light is a decay rate. Okay, you see at the moment it's set to no decay. Now, quadratic is similar to real life, so from this kind of distance, I would need to change that intensity to about 100 to get the same sort of intensity on the surface of the materials there. Okay, and as I move it away, you'll see that the density of that light changes and moves towards. So it's much more realistic in the way it's working out how the light is behaving, and that's just a quick preview done by the computer in this scene. It's not it's not an intense preview like when you render it. You can see the lighting behaves quite differently when rendered to when not, so it is just an indicator in the preview panel, so don't rely on it too heavily. Inside your area light you also have light effects and shadows. We'll come and have a look at light effects in a minute. Shadows is exactly the same as stated before. So that's the area light. So going to directional. Now directional light's an interesting one because it doesn't matter where you put it in the scene. You can see that I can move it backwards and forwards. There's no decay rate. I can move it right the way to the other side. And it still looks like it's coming from the same direction. It's almost like that this is outside the scene, and no matter where the furthest point is in the scene, it's still beyond it. So it doesn't matter where it is, and it's projecting absolutely parallel light into the scene. So it's quite an artificial style of light, but it can be quite useful for sun type effects from big sources of light like suns and stars and stuff like that. So it can be useful at times. And it's also quite useful as a fill light. We'll talk a little bit more about different kinds of light in a few minutes. So that's a directional light, nothing more to say there. Moving down, I've got a point light. Point light's a little bit like an ambient light, except obviously this is designed to be a small light in a small location, so maybe or a small light in a big location, but it's designed to be a kind of candle light or torch light, or that sort of thing. One nice feature here, you can see you've got decay rate back, you've also got light effects and shadows back, so it's a bit more of a complex light than the ambient light. It gives you a few more options that the ambient light doesn't give you. And one thing you can do is that you can actually remove light from a scene, and people often use point lights as a way of removing light from a scene to create artificially dark corners in rooms or something like that. So I'll just duplicate that. You see that made it twice as bright in my scene, and then I'll move this one close and I'll just put a minus in front of this intensity, and you'll see that that actually sucks the light out of the scene, or projects black light, if you like. I don't know which it is, but that's how it behaves. So I'll just delete that one with a little bit of luck. Anyway, there we go, and move back to this one. So that's using a negative value, which is quite a cool thing to do, and not entirely realistic at all, but can be quite useful. Light effects. There's two different light effects. I'll do light glow on this one and light fog in a minute. So light glow means that when I render a scene like this, at the moment I can't see the light source. If I add by clicking on the map button, you can see that I then render it again, and the light source has appeared. Okay, so we can now see the light source, and you can change what this light source looks like going through the options down here. Again, I'm not going to take you through those options, it will take too long, but you can play around with it. You can even switch on a lens flare, so it looks like the light is facing the camera directly and causing that to happen through a lens, which obviously it isn't because it's a virtual machine. That gives us an idea of the glow effect. Let's just get rid of that one, and we'll go to create this time, create lights, and I'm going to create a spotlight. So there's my spotlight, nicely diagrammed in Maya to look like a spotlight. You can clearly see what happens when you start playing around with it. This is probably one of the most useful lights and most used lights. It behaves like a stage light. Again, we can increase the intensity, but this time we've got a decay rate as well. So let's just stick that on quadratic and put that on 100 and leave it like that for a minute or two. I can change the cone angle, meaning that I can make it a wider spread of light or a narrow spread of light, and again the penumbra we can play around with, and the drop off you can play around with, so it looks like it drops off a little bit more. You can also stick barn doors on this under light effects, which is another effect that you can play around with and have a go with if you wanted to. We're going to have a look at light fog now. Light fog does exactly what it says. You'll notice the icon change when I click this map button. So there it goes, it's mapped it to it. It's got a solid white texture, and that looks like this when you render it. So it gives a pretty solid white. You can see how intense it is and how much it drops off. So that's quite bright actually. So what we want to do is we just want to change the density of that down definitely quite a lot, but we'll also map a cloud's texture to this colour. So I'm not going to change the colour of the cloud, but I'm just going to change the texture of it to cloud, and that's going to give us some kind of a little bit difference in that effect. So let's have a look what that looks like now. So that's still a bit harsh. You can see it's still quite hard there. What I can do is I can just jump into that light. I won't go into this too much, but I can actually change the spread of that fog, and I can change the intensity down as well, right down, so I'm getting something much more subtle from the effect of the light there, and that's giving us something a little bit nicer now. So you can see how to play around with it. The reason I'll go into detail with the light fog, it is a bit more complex than the others, than the other items I've shown you, and it's worth just having a little play around with it. You can make some lovely effects with it. You can even animate. Remember, you can animate some of these stuff by setting keys on these options, so you could even animate kind of the cloud moving and changing if you wanted to, or becoming more defined. So that gives us the spotlight. Let's get rid of that one, and the last one, I think it's the last one on the list, lights, yeah, is the volume light. So the volume light looks like this. I've generated a sphere volume light, and I can just scale that bigger, and the volume light's quite a useful tool when you want to emit light from or towards just a selected group of objects in an area, or to do a particular lighting effect within an area. By default it's set to light outwards, as it is at the moment, and in the preview you won't see any difference here, and I will have to make sure I go right over an object to give the effect in a second, but let's give it a go and see if it works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch it from, instead of projecting light outwards, to project light inwards using this volume direction. Pretty much everything else about the light is fairly similar to other lights. You can see I've got light shape here. I haven't got the diffusing of light here, but I've got the shape. I can change the shape of the volume, and then we've got a range here that we can play around with. So there's a few different things. It's a bit more complex. You need to just play around with it and see what's going on. So I've changed that to inward. So if I light the scene now, I shouldn't see anything. It should be black. Okay, because that's emitting light in towards the dome. Now, if I move it over here, now I might not see anything. It might need to be on mental ray to do this. Let's just have a quick look. Yeah, so what we need to do is just switch it over from Maya software to mental ray, and then leave that all as it is. That should be fine, and then render it again, and hopefully we should see, so it's lit it. So it's basically projecting light inwards towards the cone, and now we've just discovered that we need to be on mental ray. I wasn't sure, but we do need to be on mental ray for that to render and work correctly. The only time I've ever used this light, I'm sure lots of people use it for lots of reasons, but the only time I've ever used it is to do some glowing eyes in a robot, which I didn't want the glow to go too far away from the eyes. I didn't want it to become too prominent in the scene, so I used this area light just to contain the light source there. So it can be quite useful on occasion, but it's not going to be a light that you use all the time for sure. Right, so the last thing is just to talk about how we use lights in terms of the number of lights. So you should always have a light which generates some kind of ambient atmosphere, so just like general light, which is giving the scene a little bit of life. Then you want to have a direct light of a sort, whether that be a spotlight or something else, something that's directly lighting a particular object or objects, and it's giving you a light which is kind of focusing the viewer's eye on that object or on those objects. And then you want to have one last light, which is a fill light, and that just helps objects to look a little bit more three-dimensional. So I'll just put a point light in as an example, and I'll bring it over here, and you can see that as I bring that round, that highlighting on that edge there, on this fine edge, just helps bring the 3 dimensions of that cone a little bit more to life. So you should always work with a minimum of 3 lights, okay, in a scene. So what I've been doing today has been fairly unrealistic until this point, and that's going to look something like this. It'll be quite white, so you can see how that extra light here just helps highlight the edge there and helps bring that shape into the foreground. So a nice ambient light, so make sure we don't have surfaces that just disappear because they've got no light cast onto them. You've got a direct light, which is lighting the objects, and a fill light, okay? And using that theory, you could go quite a long way with this, adding lights, changing lights, relighting objects, etc. There's one last thing I want to just talk about, which is light linking. Let's just get rid of that one. So I've only got one here, and light linking allows us to light objects that we choose. So I could get this light to just light one of these objects instead of both of them, which is a totally unrealistic thing to do, but it's quite a useful thing to do to stop scenes getting washed out with too much light if you want particular light situations. You're going to go to Window, Rendering Editors, Relationship Editors, and Light Linking, and then we'll go light centric today. It doesn't matter which one you choose. The menu looks the same, it's just a different way, the columns a different way around. So this time I'm going to click on the ambient light. You can see at the moment it's lighting everything. I can get it to not light the cylinder, and that should make it, when I render, should make it disappear. So there we go, gone. Now if I select it again and render it again, it means it will come back again. Alright, so it means that I can use this to light particular objects in particular ways without washing out the whole scene, so for generating nice lighting effects. I hope that's been useful. That's the last thing I'm going to tell you for now. That's quite a lot of detail there and quite a lot of information to go and play with and enjoy using in Maya. All the best.